A 4-year-old beggar girl is forced to eat food alongside a stray dog, but a millionaire saw everything and does something that shocked everyone. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching sun of Savannah, Georgia, beat mercilessly on the brick sidewalks of Forsyth Park when Richard Abernathy stopped dead in his tracks, witnessing a scene that would forever alter his life. His hands trembled as he clutched the keys to his Cadillac Escalade, observing a little girl with pigtails competing for scraps of bread with a scruffy golden retriever mix. The child, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, shared every morsel found on the ground with the famished animal, both equally desperate under the sweltering southern heat. Richard, at 52, had built a textile empire exploiting small cotton farmers in the region. His bespoke suits and Rolex watch always distinguished him from the crowd strolling through the historic district. But at that moment, observing the almond-eyed girl in tattered clothes, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, a pang in his chest that had nothing to do with business or profits. Little Emily, the name he didn't yet know, looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no shame in that innocent gaze, only a precocious maturity that made him swallow hard. The girl gently stroked the dog before standing up, wiping her small hands on her ripped t-shirt. Across the park, a 67-year-old woman pulled a shopping cart overflowing with cardboard and plastic bottles. Beatrice Peterson worked as a scrap collector since dawn, her back bent by the weight of years and necessity. When she saw Emily, she waved wearily, and the girl ran towards her, helping to push the heavy cart along the uneven sidewalks. Richard remained motionless, watching the pair walk towards the Starland district, where houses clustered precariously on the outskirts. Something had cracked within him, a fissure in the armor of indifference he had constructed during years of corporate success. He returned to his car with mechanical movements, but his mind remained fixated on the image of the child sharing food with a stray dog. At home, the mansion in the prestigious Ardsley Park neighborhood received the air conditioning that contrasted brutally with the heat Emily and Beatrice faced. Eleanor Abernathy, his 48-year-old wife, analyzed financial spreadsheets at the mahogany desk in the living room. Her cold eyes rose when Richard entered, immediately noticing something different in his expression. "Home early," she commented, without fully lifting her head from the numbers. "Did the suppliers from Macon cancel the meeting?" Richard mumbled something incomprehensible and went upstairs to the study, leaving Eleanor with an uneasy feeling. In 20 years of marriage, she had learned to read every change in her husband's behavior, especially when it involved money. Her calculating nature kept her always alert for any alteration in the routine that could affect the couple's business or assets. In the study, Richard tried to focus on the contracts awaiting his signature, but Emily's image persisted. He got up and walked to the window that overlooked the entire city. Down there, he knew that the girl and her grandmother struggled to survive another day, while he possessed enough resources to change their lives with a simple transaction. That night, during the silent dinner that characterized their marital meals, Eleanor broke the silence with her sharp voice. "David called today, said he can start that job we talked about." Richard looked up from his plate, confused. "What job?" "The investigation into the competitors in Charleston. You authorized it last week." The lie flowed naturally from Eleanor's lips, who had actually hired the private investigator for other purposes. In fact, David Miller, 41, was a former police detective who now made a living investigating cases of marital infidelity and commercial fraud. Eleanor had sought his services driven by a suspicion that grew day after day. The subtle changes in Richard's behavior, his distractions during conversations about business, and especially his sudden interest in social issues of the city. Meanwhile, in the rented room in the Starland district, Beatrice helped Emily with her homework by the light of a dim bulb. The girl demonstrated a sharp intelligence that impressed even Susan Davis, her teacher at the local elementary school. At 34, Susan had grown up in the same community and recognized the special potential that shone in the little student's eyes. "Grandma, why was that man staring at me today in the park?" asked Emily as she tried to decipher the words in the borrowed schoolbook. Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine. Her life experience had taught her that rich people observing poor children rarely meant anything good. "What man, honey?" "A gentleman in nice clothes, near the big car." He looked sad. Concern gripped Beatrice. In 3 years taking care of Emily alone, since she lost her daughter in a car accident, she had developed a keen protective instinct. Any threat to her granddaughter's safety left her on high alert. Richard spent the entire night awake, walking through the corridors of the mansion while Eleanor slept soundly. A growing restlessness filled his thoughts, mixed with memories of his own childhood that he preferred to keep buried. Something in Emily's vulnerability had awakened ghosts that he had struggled to forget for decades. The next morning he made a decision that would change the course of all the lives involved in that plot still in formation. Richard's decision took shape the next morning when he woke up with a plan that seemed simple but carried consequences he couldn't even imagine. After Eleanor left for her morning meetings at the club, he drove to the central grocery store in Savannah and assembled a generous basic food basket: rice, beans, oil, sugar, flour, pasta, powdered milk, and some canned goods. His movements were cautious, as if he were planning something forbidden. The challenge was to deliver the help without causing embarrassment. Richard knew the pride of Southerners. He himself had grown up observing the iron dignity of the rural workers who supplied cotton for his company. Beatrice would certainly reject any direct offer of charity, especially coming from a well-dressed stranger. After 2 hours studying the routine of the Starland district, he discovered that Beatrice left every morning at 5 o'clock to collect recyclable material, leaving Emily with an elderly neighbor until school time. The plan was simple: leave the basket at the door of the room during that period without identification, as if it were an anonymous gift. At Professor Luis Gonzaga Elementary School, Susan Davis observed Emily with growing concern. The girl had arrived more tired than usual, yawning during the math class where she usually excelled. Her clothes, always clean despite being patched, seemed to have been washed with less care. "Emily, did you sleep well last night?" asked Susan during recess, crouching down to be at the child's height. "Grandma stayed up all night, Miss Davis. She was worried about a man who saw us in the park," replied the girl with the typical honesty of childhood. Susan felt a pang in her chest. As an experienced educator and resident of the same community, she knew that any change in the routine of vulnerable families could mean danger. Her own orphaned childhood had been marked by similar fears, when unknown adults showed sudden interest in children without adequate family protection. Meanwhile, David Miller had begun his investigation into Richard Abernathy. The former police officer had efficient methods. He discreetly followed the businessman, photographed his movements, and noted any deviation in the usual routine. What he discovered on the first day intrigued him deeply. Richard had spent almost an hour at the grocery store, buying basic items that were certainly not for his house. The maid of the mansion made those purchases weekly. Then he drove to a popular neighborhood where he had never been seen before, parking for long minutes in strategic locations, as if he was studying something specific. Suspicious reconnaissance behavior, David noted in his notebook. Possible extramarital affair with a person of lower social class. The next morning, Beatrice almost tripped over the basic food basket left at her door. Her first instinct was to look around, looking for signs of who could have done that. The neighborhood was still asleep. Only a few workers walked towards the bus stops to face another day of struggle. Inside the house, she examined each item with suspicion. Everything was sealed within the expiration date, products from well-known brands. There was no note, card, or any identification. The anonymous generosity left her deeply uncomfortable, but reality spoke louder. With those provisions, she and Emily could eat properly for an entire week. "Grandma, where did this food come from?" asked Emily when she saw the unusual abundance in the improvised pantry. "I don't know, honey. Someone left it at our door." Beatrice hesitated before continuing. Sometimes God sends angels to help those who are in need. But the distrust remained. In her 67 years of life, Beatrice had learned that free favors usually came with hidden prices. Her mind worked frantically, trying to understand who could be behind that help and what their true intentions were. Richard watched from afar, parked 3 blocks from Beatrice's house, when he saw the woman find the basket. Even from a distance, he noticed her hesitation and perfectly understood the conflict she faced. He himself knew the struggle between need and pride, a battle that had marked his own childhood in ways he preferred not to remember. The businessman decided to make that help a weekly routine. Every Thursday, a new basket would appear at Beatrice's door, always during her morning absences. The regularity, he hoped, would create a sense of security and gradual acceptance. At the Abernathy Textile Company, Eleanor reviewed the accounting books with the meticulousness of an auditor. She had noticed some small but frequent withdrawals from Richard's personal account, values that individually seemed insignificant, but that together formed an intriguing pattern. Her experience in financial administration had developed a keen instinct to detect irregularities. $200 here, $300 there, she muttered to herself, calculating the total. In 3 weeks, almost $2,000 in withdrawals without justification. For a family with the Abernathy's assets, that amount was irrelevant. But for Eleanor, who controlled every penny with surgical precision, any unauthorized spending represented a crack in her absolute control over family finances. She picked up the phone and dialed David. "I need you to speed up the investigation. There are suspicious financial movements." In the late afternoon, Susan noticed a subtle but significant change in Emily. The girl was more lively, participating during activities, and had brought a more consistent snack, a bologna and cheese sandwich, a rare luxury for a child in her situation. "Did your grandmother get a new job?" asked Susan, trying to sound casual. "No, Miss Davis. But food appeared in our house." "Grandma said it was an angel," replied Emily, chewing the sandwich with evident pleasure. Susan frowned. She knew the families of the community well and knew that mysterious help was extremely rare. Her experience as an educator had taught her to be alert to situations that deviated from the normal pattern, especially when they involved vulnerable children. That night, while Beatrice prepared a more substantial dinner than usual thanks to the mysterious provisions, she made a decision that would change the entire dynamics of the situation. She decided to find out who was behind that generosity, even if it meant spending the night awake, observing the movements in the street. What she didn't know was that her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would reveal secrets capable of transforming the lives of everyone involved in unimaginable ways. Beatrice's vigil began the following Thursday. At 4:30 in the morning, she positioned herself strategically behind the torn curtain of the window, observing every movement in the street still shrouded in darkness. Her tired eyes swept every shadow, every suspicious noise that could reveal the identity of her mysterious benefactor. For 2 hours, nothing happened beyond the routine movement of the first workers leaving for the daily grind. Beatrice was already beginning to question whether she had chosen the wrong day when a black Mercedes-Benz appeared around the corner, moving slowly along the uneven cobblestone street. Her heart skipped a beat. Cars of that value never circulated through the Starland district, except when police officers made raids or when some politician appeared during election time. She hid better behind the curtain, watching the vehicle park 3 houses before hers. Richard got out of the car carrying a plastic bag, his nervous movements and constant glances around betraying his anxiety. He walked quickly to Beatrice's door, carefully deposited the basic food basket, and ran back to the vehicle, leaving immediately with excessive haste. The discovery left Beatrice in a state of shock. A rich man in an imported car, leaving food at her door as if she were a beggar. The humiliation burned in her chest like a branding iron, mixed with a deep confusion about the stranger's motivations. "Why is he doing this?" she murmured to herself, her hands shaking with anger and incomprehension. "What does he want in return?" Meanwhile, David had spent the night in his own car, documenting Richard's movements. The photographs he took with a telephoto lens clearly showed the businessman leaving provisions at the door of a humble house. For the seasoned investigator, this confirmed his initial suspicions. Extramarital affair with a low-income woman. Illegitimate child, David concluded, noting his observations. Married man supporting a mistress and illegitimate child. But something about Richard's behavior didn't quite fit the typical pattern of these cases. There was no physical contact, hugs, or any demonstration of intimacy. The businessman hadn't even seen the woman or the child during the delivery. In the Abernathy mansion, Eleanor awaited her husband with a cup of black coffee and an expression he knew well. That calculated coldness that preceded interrogations about business or money. "Up early," she commented when Richard entered the kitchen, still trying to mask his nervousness. "Meeting with suppliers from Macon. They can only meet early in the morning," he lied, avoiding his wife's penetrating gaze. Eleanor smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "That's strange. I called their office yesterday, and they said they didn't have a meeting scheduled with you today." The silence that followed was dense as molten lead. Richard felt cold sweat run down his back as he searched for a plausible explanation, but his mind was blank. "There must have been confusion in their secretary's office," he said finally, his voice sounding artificial even to himself. "There must have been," Eleanor agreed, but her tone carried a veiled threat that made Richard's stomach clench. At school, Susan noticed that Emily was different that morning. The girl seemed worried, distracted during activities that normally sparked her interest. During recess, the teacher approached the child, who remained alone in the corner of the playground. "What's wrong today, Emily? You seem sad." "Grandma's mad, Miss Davis. She found out who's leaving food at our house, and she says we can't accept it anymore." "Why can't she accept it?" "Because he's rich and we're poor. Grandma said rich people only help when they want something bad in return." The child's words echoed in Susan's mind like an alarm. Her own experience of orphaned childhood had been marked by adults who offered help in exchange for inappropriate favors. The concern she already felt for Emily intensified drastically. "Emily, has this man talked to you or your grandma? Has he asked for anything?" "No, Miss Davis. Grandma said he just leaves the food and leaves, but she's still scared." That afternoon, Beatrice made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of simply refusing the next basket, she decided to confront that mysterious man directly. She armed herself with courage and walked to downtown Savannah, asking in shops and establishments about the owner of the black Cadillac. "That's Richard Abernathy," said a merchant on Broughton Street, "owner of the big textile mill in the industrial park. Rich man, very rich." "Is he a good man?" asked Beatrice, trying to hide her anxiety. "Well, I don't know. He pays what he owes, but they say he exploits the small farmers a lot. You don't get that rich without stepping on others, right?" The information confirmed Beatrice's worst fears. A powerful businessman, known for exploiting workers, showing interest in her orphaned granddaughter. The danger signs flashed like red neon in her mind. Richard spent the entire day at the company without being able to concentrate on anything. The lie to Eleanor had created a crack in his facade of a successful and controlled man. He knew his wife wouldn't let the matter die. Her investigative and controlling nature guaranteed she would discover the truth sooner or later. During the afternoon, he received an unexpected call on his private cell phone. A female voice, rough but determined, spoke bluntly. "This is Beatrice Peterson. I need to speak with you today. It's about the things you've been leaving at my door." The shock was so great that Richard almost dropped the phone. How had that woman gotten his number? How had she discovered his identity? 1,000 questions raced through his mind before he could answer. How did you get my phone number? That doesn't matter now. What matters is that you stop this, or I'm going to the police to report that a rich man is harassing my granddaughter." The threat hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. The last thing he needed was police involvement, especially with Eleanor already suspicious of his recent behavior. "Mrs. Peterson, you're mistaken. I just wanted to help. I have no ulterior motives. Every rich man who approaches a poor child has an ulterior motive. My granddaughter is 6 years old, Mr. Richard Abernathy. If you don't stop this, I'll make a scandal that you'll regret." The call was abruptly ended, leaving Richard in total panic. His attempt to do something good had turned into a nightmare that threatened to explode his life into pieces. That night, he arrived home to find Eleanor waiting in the living room with a folder full of documents on the coffee table. Her cold smile made Richard's blood run cold. "We need to talk, dear. I have some very interesting questions for you to answer." The confrontation in the mansion's living room began with Eleanor scattering photographs on the mahogany table like cards in a deadly game. The images showed Richard leaving the grocery store, driving through the Starland district, and leaving the basket at Beatrice's door. Each photo was a piece of evidence that destroyed any chance of denial. 2 months, Richard. 2 months you've been lying to my face," Eleanor said, her voice sharp as glass. $2,800 in basic food baskets for a woman we don't even know. Richard watched the photographs with growing horror, realizing that his every move had been documented. The feeling of being trapped suffocated him as he tried to find words that could explain the unexplainable. "Eleanor, I can explain." "Can you really?" "Then explain to me why my husband is supporting a woman and a child in the poorest neighborhood of the city. Explain to me why you're lying about non-existent meetings." "It's not what you're thinking. I've never spoken to that woman before today. I just wanted to help a child who was going hungry." Eleanor laughed bitterly, a sound that echoed through the room like shattering glass. "You think I was born yesterday, Richard? A man doesn't spend money on a strange woman without wanting something in return." "I swear I have no relationship with her. The child, she reminded me of something from my past." "What past?" Eleanor's question carried a venomous curiosity. "You've never told me anything about your past that would justify this sudden charity." Richard hesitated. There were secrets in his family history that even he didn't fully understand, gaps that he had always avoided investigating. But the pressure of the moment forced him to confront truths he preferred to keep buried. Meanwhile, in the Starland district, Beatrice faced her own crisis. After the call to Richard, the weight of the decision she had made left her in a state of panic. What if she had made a terrible mistake? What if that man really just wanted to help with no ulterior motives? "Grandma, why did you throw the food away?" asked Emily, watching the latest basic food basket deposited in the backyard trash can. "Because we can't accept these things, honey. People like us can't owe favors to rich people, but we were eating better. I wasn't hungry at school anymore." Emily's innocent words pierced Beatrice's heart like a dagger. Seeing her granddaughter going back to need because of her wounded pride was almost unbearable suffering. But her life experience screamed that accepting favors from rich strangers always came at too high a price. At school, Susan had noticed the immediate change in Emily's behavior. The girl had returned to the previous pattern, sleepy, with insufficient snacks, visibly losing weight. The teacher decided to take action that went beyond her professional responsibilities. After school, she walked to the Starland district to talk to Beatrice in person. She knew the families of the community well and knew that sometimes a kind word could make all the difference in critical situations. "Mrs. Peterson, may I come in to talk?" The older woman received Susan with initial distrust, but knew her by sight and knew of her reputation as a dedicated educator. They sat in the small room that served as a living room, bedroom, and kitchen simultaneously. "It's about Emily, right? She's been sad at school." "Mrs. Peterson, I don't want to meddle where I wasn't called, but did you cut off some help you were receiving?" The girl mentioned food that was appearing here. Beatrice sighed deeply, the weight of her decisions pressing on her stooped shoulders. "A rich man appeared leaving provisions at my door. But these things are never free, teacher. They always want something in return. Have you talked to him? Do you know what his intentions are?" "I called him today. Said I'd go to the police if he didn't stop. But now I'm thinking, what if I messed up? What if he just wanted to help?" Susan realized the painful conflict that Beatrice faced. Her own experience as an orphan had created in her a keen protective instinct, but also the wisdom that sometimes appearances were deceiving. "How about you find out more about this man before making a final decision? Sometimes talking in person clarifies a lot." Back at the mansion, the confrontation between Richard and Eleanor had escalated to a dangerous level. She had revealed that she not only knew about the basic food baskets, but had also investigated all of his financial movements in recent months. "There's more, Richard. Much more." Eleanor opened an additional folder. "You've been looking for information about your family, called registries, paid for genealogical research. Why?" The discovery left Richard stunned. Eleanor had monitored even his discreet attempts to investigate his family origins, something he had started after finding strange documents in his deceased father's file. "You're spying on me as if I were a criminal. I'm protecting our assets from a husband who's doing strange things and lying about everything. What's this story about looking for your family? You always said your parents were respected merchants." I found some papers from my father that don't make sense. They seem to indicate that I may have been adopted." The revelation caught Eleanor off guard. In 20 years of marriage, this possibility had never been mentioned, but instead of showing understanding or support, her eyes gleamed with a calculating coldness. "Adopted? That would explain a lot. Your strange habits, this sudden obsession with a poor child. Inferior blood always shows up sooner or later." Eleanor's words hit Richard like whiplashes. The casual cruelty with which she despised his possible humble origins revealed a side of her personality that he had tried to ignore for years. "What kind of person are you, Eleanor? How can you talk like that? I'm the kind of person who built this fortune with you and won't let you destroy everything because of crises of conscience or attempts to find your miserable roots." At that moment, the phone rang. Richard answered automatically, still shocked by his wife's coldness. "Richard Abernathy." "Yes? This is Beatrice Peterson again. I've been thinking, maybe we could talk in person. Tomorrow afternoon in Forsyth Park. I want to understand what you really want." The call was ended before he could answer. Eleanor had heard everything, and her predatory smile indicated that she was planning something that would change the course of that entire situation. "Great," she said, rising from the armchair. "Tomorrow you're going to that meeting, and I'm going with you to make sure this charade ends once and for all." The terror that took hold of Richard at that moment was more than fear. It was the certainty that his life was about to implode irreversibly. Forsyth Park was teeming with the typical bustle of a Friday afternoon when Beatrice arrived punctually at 3 o'clock, wearing her best clothes, a faded but clean floral dress that had belonged to her deceased daughter. Her nerves were on edge, her hands trembling slightly as she looked for Richard among the passers-by. She didn't expect to see two people approaching. Richard walked tensely, visibly embarrassed, alongside an elegant woman with blonde hair and expensive clothes that clashed completely with the popular atmosphere of the park. Eleanor observed everything around her with an expression of barely disguised disdain, as if she were stepping on contaminated territory. "Mrs. Peterson?" Richard approached hesitantly, extending his hand in respectful greeting. "This is my wife, Eleanor." Beatrice shook the offered hand firmly, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the dynamic between the couple. The tension was palpable, and the wife's presence completely transformed the nature of that encounter. "I didn't know you would be accompanied," said Beatrice, addressing Eleanor directly. "I thought it would be a private conversation." "Everything that involves my husband concerns me," Eleanor replied coldly, "especially when he's spending our money on strangers without consulting me." Eleanor's immediate hostility made Beatrice harden her defensive posture. Decades dealing with people from different social classes had taught her to recognize arrogance and prejudice instantly. "Your money?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "I thought your husband was the one who worked. I manage all the family businesses, and I won't allow profiteers to benefit from his misdirected generosity." "Eleanor, please," Richard murmured, clearly embarrassed by his wife's aggressiveness. "Profiteers?" Beatrice took a step forward, her wounded dignity inflaming her courage. "Ma'am, I called your husband precisely to refuse the help. I didn't ask for anything. I don't want anything from you." "Of course you do. People like you always do. That's why you feigned indignation and asked for a personal meeting to negotiate the price of your dignity." The insult echoed through Forsyth Park like a public slap. Some passers-by stopped to observe the escalating argument, creating an awkward circle around the trio. Beatrice felt her blood boil, but her life experience had taught her that responding aggressively would only confirm the arrogant woman's prejudices. "You don't know me well enough to talk to me like that," Beatrice said, keeping her voice steady but controlled. "I've worked since I was 12 years old. I raised my daughter alone, and I'm raising my granddaughter alone now. I've never begged anyone for anything." "Then why did you accept the food baskets for 2 months?" Eleanor's question was like a well-aimed dagger. Beatrice felt the contradiction of her situation. She had accepted the help when she thought it was anonymous, but she rejected it now that she knew the source. The implicit hypocrisy left her without solid arguments. I thought it was church charity, something like that." "Liar. You knew it came from someone specific. That's why you investigated until you found out who my husband was. Now you want to blackmail him by threatening to involve the police." Richard finally found the courage to intervene. "Eleanor, that's enough. You have a right to be suspicious, Mrs. Peterson, but I swear my intentions were genuine." "Genuineness based on what?" Beatrice stared directly at him. "Why my granddaughter? Why us? You didn't even know us." The question struck at the heart of the matter that had tormented Richard for weeks. Why had that specific child awakened something so profound in him? Why did her image persist in his thoughts, creating an urgency to help that he himself didn't fully understand? "I saw your granddaughter sharing food with a scruffy golden retriever mix. It reminded me of situations from my own childhood that I'd rather forget." "What situations?" Beatrice perceived something different in Richard's voice, a vulnerability that contrasted with his appearance as a successful man. "It's not important," Eleanor interrupted. "What matters is that this Good Samaritan act is over. There will be no more baskets, no more contact. My husband has mental issues to resolve before he goes around handing out money." "Mental issues?" Beatrice frowned. "He's obsessed with the idea that he was adopted, looking for imaginary family origins. He's obviously going through some kind of midlife crisis that makes him identify with the poor and unfortunate." The casual cruelty with which Eleanor exposed her husband's personal problems in public shocked Beatrice. Even coming from different social classes, she recognized when a marriage was corroded from within. "Mrs. Abernathy," Beatrice said slowly, You treat your husband like he's an employee. That's none of my business, but your granddaughter is different. My granddaughter? Eleanor laughed disdainfully. We don't have children, and we'll never have granddaughters. What are you talking about? Beatrice realized that she had misspoke, but Eleanor's confusion revealed something interesting, the coldness with which she rejected even the possibility of genuine family ties. I meant my granddaughter, Emily. She's a bright, hard-working child who doesn't deserve to be treated as an object of charity or a source of marital conflict. I completely agree, Richard said, finally finding an opportunity to express his true feelings. I never wanted to hurt your granddaughter. I just wanted to help a child who was in need. And now, Beatrice asked, what happens now? The silence that followed was charged with multiple tensions. Eleanor awaited confirmation that this madness was over. Richard struggled against contradictory impulses to defy his wife and protect Beatrice's dignity. And Beatrice weighed her own pride against the real needs of her granddaughter. It was then that Susan Davis appeared unexpectedly in the park, walking directly toward the group. The teacher had decided to intervene after seeing Emily crying at school, worried about the growing tension at home. Mrs. Peterson, it's good to find you here, Susan said, deliberately ignoring the presence of the Abernathys. I need to talk about Emily. She's very worried about you. Susan's arrival completely changed the dynamics of the situation. Eleanor observed her with calculating interest, immediately realizing that here was someone who could provide valuable information about the family that had captured her husband's obsessive attention. "You're the child's teacher?" Eleanor asked, her voice taking on a falsely interested tone. "I am, and you are?" "Eleanor Abernathy, wife of the man who's been supporting you." The direct insult made Susan immediately stiffen. As an experienced educator and member of the Starland district community, she knew well the type of arrogance that Eleanor represented. "No one here is being supported by anyone," Susan replied firmly. "Mrs. Peterson works as hard as anyone I know. Collecting trash isn't dignified work to support a child adequately." Eleanor's statement crossed a line that should not have been crossed. The explicit contempt for Beatrice's honest work inflamed not only the collector herself, but also Susan and several passers-by who had stopped to observe the discussion. "You've gone too far," Beatrice said, her voice low but laden with contained fury. "You can insult me, but you won't insult my work or my ability to take care of my granddaughter." At that moment, the situation exploded in a way that none of those involved had foreseen, creating consequences that would extend far beyond that afternoon in Savannah's Central Park. The explosion came in the form of words that Beatrice never thought would come out of her mouth. Decades of silent humiliation, swallowed prejudice, and trampled dignity finally found a release valve in Eleanor's unmeasured arrogance. "You want to know something? You can keep your dirty money and your cowardly husband. I raised my daughter, and I'm raising my granddaughter without needing handouts from people who think poor people have no dignity." Beatrice's shout echoed through the park, causing several people to stop completely to observe the scene. Storekeepers came out of their shops, retirees rose from their benches, and even the traffic seemed to slow down. "How dare you talk to me like that?" Eleanor took a threatening step toward Beatrice. "You're nothing but a trash collector who lives off favors. And you're nothing but a sour woman who treats her own husband like a dog." Beatrice didn't back down. "At least I know what real love is." The crowd grew around them, and many of those present had known Beatrice for years. They knew of her daily struggle, of how she had raised her daughter working honestly, of how she now dedicated her entire life to her orphaned granddaughter. Popular sympathy was clearly on the collector's side. Richard tried to position himself between the two women, but he was paralyzed by the shame of the situation he had created. His attempt to do something good had turned into a humiliating public spectacle for everyone involved. "Eleanor, let's go." This has gone too far. I'm not going anywhere until this woman apologizes for the scandal she's making." "I apologize?" Beatrice laughed bitterly. "You're the one who came here to curse me, humiliate me, insult my work, and you want me to apologize?" Susan, realizing that the situation was completely out of control, decided to intervene with the moral authority that her profession conferred upon her in the community. "Everyone, this isn't leading anywhere. We have a child involved in this story, and she's what matters." "Exactly," Eleanor said, turning to Susan with renewed interest. "Speaking of the child, tell me, does this girl have a father? Where is he?" The question caught everyone off guard. Beatrice paled, Susan hesitated, and even Richard realized that something delicate was being touched. "That's none of your business," Beatrice replied, but her voice lost some of its previous firmness. "It is my business, if my husband is spending our money on you. I want to know the whole story. Single woman with a small child, no man around. There's always a story behind it." Eleanor's insinuating tone made several men in the crowd demonstrate discomfort. It was clear that she was implying something inappropriate about Beatrice's character. "Mrs. Peterson's daughter lost her life in a car accident 3 years ago," Susan said firmly. "Emily's father was also in the car. The girl was orphaned and has been raised by her grandmother ever since." The information caused a sudden silence in the crowd. Many of those present vaguely remembered the accident. A young couple returning from a wedding party on a rainy night. The car that skidded on the descent from the mountain. The tragedy that left a small child orphaned. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Emily's story was even more tragic than he imagined. A child who had lost her parents and now depended entirely on an elderly grandmother who struggled to survive by collecting recyclable materials. "My condolences," he said sincerely, addressing Beatrice. "I didn't know the full story." "Tragedy or not," Eleanor remained relentless, "that doesn't justify my husband getting involved with you. He has his own problems to solve." "What problems?" asked a voice in the crowd. Eleanor realized too late that she had spoken out of turn. Revealing marital problems in public was the last thing she should do, but her anger had clouded her habitually calculating judgment. "This is not a subject to be discussed on the street," she muttered, finally showing some embarrassment. "It's not," Beatrice agreed. "But since you came here to humiliate me in public, maybe it's good for everyone to know what kind of person you are." "What kind of person am I?" "The kind that sees an orphaned child going hungry, and instead of feeling compassion, is worried about the money that can help her. The kind that insults honest work. The kind that treats her own husband like property." Each accusation from Beatrice found an echo in the growing crowd. Many of those present worked in services that people like Eleanor would consider undignified. Cleaners, street vendors, bricklayers, seamstresses. The arrogance of the businessman's wife had touched personal wounds of dozens of people. "She's right," said a woman in the crowd. "Rich people think we don't have feelings." "It's true," agreed an elderly man. "They want us to be humble, but they themselves don't know what humility is." The situation was becoming dangerous for Eleanor. Popular sympathy was clearly against her, and some people in the crowd began to show open hostility. Richard realized that he needed to get his wife out of there before the situation escalated further. "Eleanor, let's go now. I'm not going to be driven out by this rabble." The term rabble was the last straw. Several men in the crowd took threatening steps, and women began to shout insults. The situation was about to become physically dangerous. It was then that Susan had an idea that would completely change the course of events. "Mrs. Peterson, wouldn't you like to take this conversation to a more private place? At the school, for example. We can talk calmly about Emily's future." "At the school?" Richard was immediately interested in the suggestion. "Yes, there we can talk like civilized adults, away from curious eyes. And you can better understand the work that Emily does, see how smart she is. The proposal offered a dignified exit for everyone. Beatrice could get out of the embarrassing situation without seeming like she was running away. Richard would have the opportunity to better understand the girl's situation, and Eleanor would be forced to behave more civilized in an educational environment. "I accept," Beatrice said immediately. "Me too," Richard agreed. Eleanor hesitated. Part of her wanted to simply leave and end the whole embarrassing situation, but her controlling nature would not allow her to leave her husband alone with those women. "All right, but this has to be resolved today." As the group headed towards the municipal school, the crowd in the park continued to comment on what they had witnessed. In a few hours, all of Savannah would know about the public argument between the rich businessman's wife and the poor trash collector, and opinions would be clearly divided between sympathy for Beatrice's dignity and indignation at Eleanor's arrogance. What none of them knew was that at the school, discoveries about Richard's past and unexpected family connections were about to reveal secrets that would completely change their lives. The Professor Luis Gonzaga Municipal School was empty that Friday afternoon, with only a few cleaning staff finishing their tasks. Susan opened the classroom where Emily studied, a simple but well-maintained environment, with organized desks and children's work pasted on the faded walls. "Please sit down," Susan said, indicating the chairs arranged in a circle. "Here we can talk without interruptions." Richard observed the drawings on the walls, immediately recognizing Emily's handiwork. Always colorful birds, cheerful flowers, smiling families. There was a persistent hope in those images that contrasted painfully with the difficult reality that the girl faced. "Are these your granddaughter's works?" he asked Beatrice, pointing to a sequence of drawings signed with neat, childish handwriting. "They are. She loves to draw. Ever since she was little, always scribbling something." Eleanor watched the interaction with growing impatience. "Can we get straight to the point? I didn't come here to appreciate children's art." "The point is exactly this," Susan said firmly. "Emily is an exceptional child. She has excellent grades, helps younger classmates, never gives trouble. But I see that she's suffering from this tension at home." "What tension?" Beatrice defended herself. "I do everything for my granddaughter." "I know you do, Mrs. Peterson, but the girl perceives your worries. Yesterday, she asked me if she would have to leave school because the rich man was no longer going to help you." The revelation struck Richard like a stabbing. He had tried to help discreetly and had ended up creating a situation that left a 6-year-old child worried about her own survival. "I never wanted to cause her suffering," he said, his voice laden with guilt. I just wanted to do the difference in her life." "Why?" Beatrice's question carried less hostility and more genuine curiosity. "You have hundreds of employees. You must know dozens of families in need." "Why Emily?" Richard hesitated, fighting against memories he had spent decades trying to suppress. "Because when I saw her sharing food with that dog, I remembered myself." "How so?" "I've been hungry too, Mrs. Peterson. There are many things about my childhood that I've tried to forget." Eleanor laughed dismissively. "Here he goes with that made-up story. Your parents were respected merchants. You grew up in a good house with maids." "My adoptive parents were merchants," Richard corrected, his voice gaining firmness. "I recently discovered that I was adopted as a baby. Before that, I came from a very poor family." The silence that followed was dense. Beatrice observed Richard with new eyes, seeing vulnerability where she previously saw only privilege. Susan realized that she was witnessing profound revelations that explained many things. "When did you find this out?" Beatrice asked softly. "A few months ago. I was organizing my deceased father's papers and found documents, certificates that didn't make sense, dates that didn't match. I hired a private investigator to find out the truth." "And what did you find?" Richard took a deep breath before continuing. That I was born into a family of farm workers in Macon. My biological parents were very poor. They worked as sharecroppers on a farm. When I was 2 years old, they lost their lives in a terrible drought. I was orphaned and given up for adoption. The story echoed through the room like a painful confession. Beatrice felt tears forming in her eyes, recognizing in Richard's tragedy echoes of her own granddaughter's tragedy. "That's why you were interested in Emily," she murmured. "Because she's an orphan too." "Exactly. When I saw that girl struggling to survive, it was like I was seeing my own past. The difference is that I was lucky. I was adopted by a family that gave me opportunities. She only has you. She only has you," sounded like a belittlement, but Beatrice realized that Richard had not spoken with contempt. There was recognition and respect in his voice. "You're everything she needs," he corrected, "but maybe I could help without hurting your dignity." "How?" Beatrice's question carried caution, but also genuine interest. It was then that Susan had an idea that would change everything. "What if you helped not only Emily, but other children at the school? You could sponsor an educational program, provide school supplies, improve the infrastructure." Educational program. Richard was immediately interested. "Yes, many children here need tutoring. They have potential but lack resources. You could create something that benefits the entire community, not just one family." The suggestion was brilliant. It would allow Richard to channel his impulse to help in a broader and more socially acceptable way. Beatrice would not feel embarrassed about being singled out, and Emily would benefit along with other children. That would make sense, Beatrice agreed slowly. If it was something for the whole school, it wouldn't seem like specific charity. Eleanor, who had remained silent during the revelations about her husband's past, finally exploded. "Are you all crazy? He wants to spend our money creating a school for poor people now. Not our money, Eleanor. My money. Your money." She laughed incredulously. "Everything you have was built with me by my side. I manage the business. I make the important financial decisions. Maybe it's time for that to change." Richard's statement fell like a bomb in the room. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, he was openly challenging Eleanor's financial authority. "You don't have the guts," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "I do, and you know why? Because I discovered who I really am. I'm not the rich, insensitive man you want me to be. I'm the son of poor workers, and I should never have forgotten that." Susan and Beatrice watched the marital dynamic unraveling before their eyes. The discovery about his origins had freed something in Richard that his wife had spent years trying to suppress. "If you do this," Eleanor threatened, "you'll regret it. I know all the secrets of our business. I can destroy you financially." "You can try," Richard replied with a calm that surprised even himself. "But now I know who my true allies are." He turned to Beatrice and Susan. "If you agree, I'd like to talk about creating a supplemental educational center here in the Starland district. Something that helps children like Emily develop their full potential. And I would like to participate actively," Susan said excitedly. "I have ideas about programs that could make a real difference." "Count me in too," said Beatrice, surprising herself. "I can help with organization, cleaning, whatever is needed." Eleanor watched the alliance forming with growing horror. In a few hours, she had completely lost control over her husband and seen him ally himself with people she considered inferior. "You'll all regret this," she said, getting up abruptly. "All of you." She left the room with furious steps, leaving a charged silence behind. But for the first time in months, it was a hopeful silence, full of possibilities instead of conflicts. What none of the three knew was that Eleanor's threat was not empty and that she was already planning a revenge that would put everything they had just built in mortal danger. Eleanor's revenge began the following Monday, when she arrived at the textile company office even before Richard. For years managing the finances, she had developed a network of contacts and strategies that her husband didn't even imagine existed. Her first call was to David Miller. I need all the details about this teacher and this trash collector, she said coldly. Criminal records, debts, anything that can be used against them. Mrs. Abernathy, my investigation was about possible marital infidelity. What you're asking for is... It's exactly what you're going to do if you want to receive the rest of the payment. And there's a generous bonus if you get really compromising information. David hesitated. His conscience as a former police officer alerted him to the questionable ethical aspects of that request, but the financial difficulties he faced spoke louder. What kind of information are you looking for specifically? Anything that proves they are opportunists, that they have a history of exploiting well-intentioned people, that the child should not be in the care of the grandmother. Use your creativity. Meanwhile, Richard spent Sunday enthusiastically planning the educational center with Susan and Beatrice. They met again at the school, this time with Emily present, and the girl was delighted to learn that there would be a project that would help other children in the community. "Is Uncle Richard going to build a new school?" she asked, her eyes shining with hope. "Not a new school, my dear," Susan explained, "but a place where you can have extra classes, learn different things, have access to books and computers." "And will other children be able to go too?" "Many other children," confirmed Richard, feeling his heart warm with the girl's genuine enthusiasm. Beatrice observed the interaction with mixed feelings. Part of her was genuinely grateful for the opportunity that was opening up for Emily and other children in the community. But another part remained suspicious of the motivations and sustainability of that project. "Mr. Abernathy," she said carefully, "are you sure your wife won't be able to prevent this? She seems to be a very determined woman. Eleanor manages the company, but I'm still the majority owner. I can make decisions about social investments without needing her approval." What Richard didn't know was that Eleanor had spent years preparing for a situation exactly like that. Documents had been altered, broad powers of attorney had been signed during periods when he was distracted with other matters, and bank accounts had been gradually transferred to her exclusive management. On Tuesday, the first bomb exploded. Richard arrived at the company to find two unfamiliar lawyers waiting in his office, accompanied by Eleanor with a poorly disguised expression of triumph. "Richard, these are Doctors Almerio and Santana, specialists in business law. They've come to clarify some questions about the management of the company." "What questions?" Richard felt a chill down his spine. "Mr. Abernathy," said the older lawyer, "your wife approached us concerned about some recent financial decisions you've been making without prior consultation. Decisions that may compromise the stability of the company." "What decisions?" "I haven't spent a cent on the educational project yet." "But you've already made public commitments," Eleanor interjected. "Everyone in town is talking about your promise to create a center for needy children. That creates expectations and legal responsibilities. Furthermore," continued the lawyer, "your wife has informed us about your recent emotional state. The discoveries about your family origin seem to have caused psychological instability that may affect your business judgment." The accusation of mental instability hit Richard like a slap. "Are you questioning my sanity because I found out I was adopted?" "We're questioning impulsive decisions made under emotional pressure," corrected the second lawyer. "Your wife has broad power of attorney to protect the interests of the company in situations like this." Richard looked at Eleanor with growing horror. "What power of attorney? I never signed anything that gave you the power to make decisions for me." "You did. Remember that pile of documents you signed last year when you were worried about the truckers' strike? One of them was a power of attorney for cases of business emergency." The memory returned like a fist in the stomach. He really had signed several documents quickly during that turbulent period, trusting in Eleanor's management, as he had always done during their marriage. "This is a scam," he murmured. "You tricked me." "I protected our assets," she replied coldly. "And I'm going to continue protecting them, even if it's from yourself." That afternoon, David appeared at the school with information that he knew was fabricated, but that Eleanor had insisted he discover. His plan was to sow doubts about the character of Susan and Beatrice in the mind of anyone who could influence Richard. "Miss Davis," he approached her at the end of classes, "I'm a private investigator. I need to ask some questions about one of the families of your students." "Which family?" Susan immediately became defensive. "The family of the girl Emily. I received an anonymous complaint that there may be neglect in the care of the child." "Complaint from whom? That's absurd. Mrs. Peterson is an exemplary grandmother." "Are you sure? Haven't you noticed signs that the child may be being used to obtain undue benefits? Well-intentioned people are sometimes deceived by experienced opportunists." The insinuation was clear, and Susan immediately realized the connection to recent events. "Who sent you here? Was it Richard's wife?" David neither confirmed nor denied, but his expression said everything. "Just do your part as a responsible educator. If you find that this child is being exploited in any way, it's your duty to report it." The veiled threat left Susan furious, but also worried. As a teacher, she knew that any formal complaint, even unfounded, could result in Emily being temporarily removed from Beatrice's care while the situation was investigated. Meanwhile, Beatrice faced her own pressure. Neighbors had begun to make strange comments about her sudden luck in getting help from rich people. Malicious insinuations circulated throughout the community, carefully planted by people Eleanor had hired to spread rumors. "Beatrice, is it true that you're selling your granddaughter to that rich businessman?" asked a neighbor with false concern. "How can you say such a thing?" Beatrice was horrified. "It's just that everyone's talking. Pretty child, grandmother in need, rich man getting interested out of nowhere. People are suspicious." The seeds of doubt were planted with surgical precision. Beatrice began to question whether her association with Richard was damaging Emily's reputation in the community. The girl already faced enough challenges being orphaned and poor. She didn't need malicious rumors about her integrity. On Wednesday, the situation exploded when Richard discovered that his personal bank account had been blocked. Eleanor had used the power of attorney to claim impulsive expenses incompatible with mental stability and obtained a temporary court order freezing his assets. "You destroyed me," he said, confronting her in the office. "I saved you from destroying yourself," she replied without showing remorse. "And I saved our company from being transformed into a charity for trash collectors. You have no right to do this. I have all the rights you gave me when you signed that power of attorney. And I have one more surprise. If you continue with this obsession with that family, I'm going to take even more drastic measures." "What measures?" Eleanor smiled with a cruelty that chilled Richard's blood. "I'm going to officially report that the child is being neglected by her grandmother and exploited by unscrupulous adults. I have evidence that shows a suspicious pattern of behavior." The threat was the final blow. Eleanor had found the perfect way to destroy not only Richard's plans, but also the lives of Emily and Beatrice. A formal complaint could result in the separation of the family he had tried to help. That night, Richard called Beatrice and Susan asking for an urgent meeting. When they met at the school, his somber expression said it all before he even spoke. "I need to tell you what's happening," he said, his voice broken by defeat. "And maybe it's better if you stay away from me before it's too late." The meeting at the school took place on a rainy Thursday, with the sound of rain on the tin roof, creating a melancholic soundtrack for the most difficult conversation Richard had ever needed to have. Beatrice arrived wet, having walked in the rain because she didn't have money for the bus fare. Susan was visibly tense, still disturbed by David's threatening visit. "Eleanor managed to block all my accounts," Richard began bluntly. "She used a power of attorney that she made me sign last year to claim that I am mentally unstable. I no longer have access to my own money." "How is that possible?" Susan was shocked. "She's been planning this for years." Documents signed without me reading them properly, gradual transfers of power, legal contacts I didn't even know about. When I decided to help you, she activated a plan that was already ready. Beatrice absorbed the information in silence for a moment. And now? Now she's threatened to report you to Child Protective Services. She's going to claim that Emily is being neglected and that adults are taking advantage of her to obtain financial benefits. The revelation hit Beatrice like lightning in a clear sky. Her worst fears about getting involved with rich people were materializing exactly as she had feared from the beginning. "I knew it," she murmured, her hands trembling. "I knew this was going to be a problem. People like us can't mix with people like you without suffering the consequences." "Mrs. Peterson, this is not your fault or Mr. Abernathy's fault," Susan said firmly. "It's pure malice from that woman. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. What matters is that my granddaughter can be taken from me because of this mess." Richard felt the weight of responsibility crushing his shoulders. His attempt to do something good had turned into a real threat to the only family Emily knew. "I'm going to step away completely," he said in a broken voice. "I'm going to say publicly that I no longer have any intention of helping, that it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe that way Eleanor will leave you alone." "And the educational center?" asked Susan. "It died before it was born. I can't do anything without access to my resources, and even if I managed to recover them, Eleanor would turn any attempt to help into a weapon against you." The silence that followed was loaded with frustration and shattered dreams. For a few days, it had seemed possible that something beautiful could arise from that situation. Now, the cruel reality was imposing itself again. "You know what hurts me the most," said Beatrice finally. "It's that Emily was so excited. She came home talking about the educational center, the books she was going to be able to read, the computers she was going to learn to use. How am I going to explain to her that it's all over?" At that moment, the classroom door opened and Emily ran in, escaping the rain that had increased. She stopped abruptly when she saw the three adults with somber expressions. "Hi, Uncle Richard. Hi, Miss Davis," she said cheerfully, then noticed the heavy atmosphere. "Why is everyone sad?" The innocence of the question pierced the hearts of the three adults. How to explain to a 6-year-old child that the dreams she had begun to nurture were being destroyed by adult malice? "My dear," began Beatrice, trying to find appropriate words. "Sometimes adults' plans don't work out the way we expect." "The educational center isn't going to happen?" Richard knelt down to be at the girl's height. "Emily, I really wanted to do this for you and the other children, but problems arise that I can't solve alone." "Is it because of the angry woman?" The question surprised everyone. "What angry woman?" "The one who shouted at Grandma in the park. The children at school are saying that she doesn't want you to help us." Susan realized that the rumors were circulating even among the children, creating an even more embarrassing situation for Emily. "Are the children saying bad things about me?" asked Emily, demonstrating a precocious maturity that broke the hearts of everyone present. "No, my dear," lied Beatrice. "No one is saying anything bad about you." But Emily had the keen intuition of children who grow up in difficult environments. "Grandma, if Uncle Richard can't help us anymore, are we going to go hungry again?" The direct and practical question demonstrated that the girl perfectly understood the implications of the situation. There was no way to protect her from reality with gentle explanations. "We're not going to go hungry," said Beatrice, with more conviction than she felt. "Grandma has always managed, and always will." Richard watched the interaction, feeling completely powerless. There was a brilliant child, full of potential, being forced to return to a life of deprivation because of his wife's malice. It was then that Susan had a desperate idea. What if we created the educational center ourselves? "How?" asked Beatrice. "Without Mr. Abernathy's money, using resources from the community itself, small donations from many people, volunteer work. It would be smaller, simpler, but it would be ours. Miss Davis, we don't have the knowledge to manage something like that, protested Beatrice. I have pedagogical knowledge. You have life experience and organizational skills. And there are other people in the community who could help. Richard perked up at the possibility. I can help with business knowledge, even without being able to contribute financially. I can teach how to organize, how to get donations, how to make partnerships. But without getting officially involved, Beatrice said quickly, if your name appears on anything, your wife will attack again. I agree. I'll stay behind the scenes. You stay in front. Emily watched the conversation with growing hope. So the center can still happen. It can, said Susan with renewed conviction. It's just going to be different than we thought before. It will be better, added Beatrice, surprising herself with her own determination. Because it will be made by ourselves, with our own hands. That night, as the rain continued to fall on Savannah, the three adults parted with a strange sense of defeat, transformed into determination. Eleanor had managed to destroy the original plan, but inadvertently had given rise to something potentially more powerful, a truly community project. What they didn't know was that David had recorded the entire conversation through a microphone he had planted at the school during his previous visit. The next morning, Eleanor would have in her hands detailed information about their new plans. And this time, she was prepared to use even more drastic tactics. Meanwhile, in a twist that no one could predict, a document forgotten in the dead file of the textile company was about to reveal secrets about Eleanor herself that would completely change the balance of power between her and Richard. The discovery would come from an unexpected source, from David himself, who was beginning to question whether he was on the right side of that war. On Friday morning, he called Richard with a proposal that would change everything. Mr. Abernathy, I need to talk to you urgently. I have information about your wife that you need to know, information that can return control of your life to your hands. The call promised a twist that none of those involved were prepared to face. The meeting between Richard and David took place at a discreet cafe in Savannah's historic district, away from the curious eyes that could report the meeting to Eleanor. The ex-police officer arrived carrying a folder of documents and an expression of guilt that immediately caught Richard's attention. Mr. Abernathy, first of all, I need to apologize, began David, avoiding direct eye contact. I agreed to do things that go against my conscience. Your wife hired me not only to investigate, but to fabricate evidence against those women. Fabricate evidence. She wanted me to create proof that the teacher and the trash collector were financially exploiting well-intentioned people. She wanted false documents, bought witnesses, anything that justified an official complaint. Richard felt his stomach turn. And you did it? I started to do it. But when I saw the recording of your conversation at the school yesterday, when I heard that child asking if she was going to go hungry again, I couldn't continue. David opened the folder and spread documents on the table. But while I was investigating for your wife, I discovered things about her that completely changed my perspective on the situation. The papers showed bank statements, international transfers, and contracts in the name of shell companies. Richard leafed through the documents with growing astonishment. What is all this? Your wife has been embezzling money from the company for at least 5 years. Accounts abroad. Fictitious companies that bill for non-existent services, systematic overbilling with partner suppliers. She stole more than $2 million. The number echoed in Richard's mind like an explosion. $2 million. A fortune that could have funded dozens of social projects, helped hundreds of families like Beatrice's. How did you find this out? Investigating the company's finances to better understand her asset situation. Your wife gave me access to confidential information, thinking I was working in her favor. What she didn't know is that my police experience taught me to recognize money laundering schemes. Richard studied the documents more carefully. Regular transfers to accounts in tax havens, fake invoices from companies that did not exist, consulting contracts with absurd amounts paid to phantom legal entities. Why are you telling me this? Eleanor is paying you generously. David sighed deeply. Because I saw my daughter among the children who were waiting for the food baskets you distributed. Maria Eduarda, 7 years old. She studies at the same school as Emily. The revelation caught Richard off guard. Your daughter? I'm divorced, I pay alimony, but there are months that it gets difficult. Maria sometimes goes to school without eating properly. When I learned that there was someone helping children in the community and that my own daughter indirectly benefited from it, I couldn't continue working against you. The humanization of David completely changed the dynamic of the situation. He was no longer just a mercenary investigator, but a father struggling for his own daughter's survival. What do you propose I do with this information? Use it to regain control of your company and your life. Eleanor committed serious crimes. With this evidence, you can not only annul the power of attorney she used against you, but also recover the stolen money. Richard leafed through the documents again, processing the implications. This would destroy her completely. She tried to destroy you and those innocent women. She deserves to suffer the consequences of her own actions. The logic was irrefutable, but Richard felt a moral weight in using information obtained in a questionable way, even against someone who had acted with such malice. There's something else, continued David. I found out that she already has tickets purchased to Portugal. She intends to flee the country next week, taking as much money as possible. The information accelerated Richard's heart. If Eleanor fled with the embezzled funds, he would be not only without access to his own assets, but also responsible for the debts she had created using shell companies. She plans to leave me with the bill for her thefts? Exactly. The fraudulent contracts are all in the name of the company, which is legally yours. If she disappears, you're responsible for paying suppliers who never provided services, taxes on fictitious income, fines for irregularities she created. The magnitude of the betrayal left Richard in a state of shock. For 20 years, he had completely trusted Eleanor, allowing her to manage the finances while he focused on the operational part of the business. What do you think I should do? Hire a criminal lawyer today. Present this evidence, request the immediate blocking of her accounts, cancel the power of attorney based on fraud, and do it before she realizes she's been discovered. That afternoon, while Richard was racing against time to organize a legal response to Eleanor's scheme, a completely different meeting was taking place at the municipal school. Susan had called parents and guardians of the neediest children to discuss the creation of the Community Educational Center. The room was packed. Beatrice was present, as was Mrs. Maria, a mother of 3 who worked as a cleaning lady, Mr. Jose, a retiree who did odd jobs as an electrician, Mrs. Fatima, a seamstress who raised 2 grandchildren alone, all people who knew intimately the daily struggle to give their children better opportunities. The idea is simple, explained Susan. Create a space where our children can have tutoring, access to books, educational activities that don't exist in regular school. And how are we going to pay for this? Asked Mr. Jose, always practical. Each family contributes what they can. Those who have money give money, those who don't contribute with work. Some teach what they know, others help with maintenance, others make snacks for the children. And where will it operate? Questioned Mrs. Maria. I thought of Mr. Manuel's old house, which has been abandoned for 2 years. His children live in Charleston. Maybe they'll accept a symbolic rent. Beatrice spoke for the first time. I can help with organization and cleaning, and Emily can help younger children with reading. Beatrice's willingness to actively contribute encouraged the others present. If a recyclable material collector was willing to donate her free time, they could also participate. Mr. Jose, couldn't you help us with the electrical part? Asked Susan. I can, and if we can get used material, I won't charge anything. Mrs. Fatima, don't you teach the girls how to sew? I do. It's a skill that can help them in the future. Gradually, a real project began to take shape. Each person present had skills that could contribute to the educational center. It wouldn't be the grandiose project that Richard had imagined, but it would be something genuine, sustainable, and truly community-based. "How many children do you think we could serve?" asked Susan. 20, maybe 30, Beatrice estimated, depending on how much space we can manage. "And when do we start?" "Next week," Susan decided. "We'll visit Mr. Smith's old house, get quotes for the renovations, and start working." While the meeting at the school buzzed with hope and planning, Richard was in a criminal lawyer's office, discovering that his situation was even more serious than David had revealed. "Mr. Abernathy," the lawyer said after reviewing the documents, "your wife didn't just steal money. She created a sophisticated scheme that could be classified as racketeering. The amounts involved and the duration of the scheme make this a federal crime." "What does this mean for me?" "It means you could be considered a victim instead of an accomplice, but only if we act quickly. If she flees the country and the authorities discover the scheme by other means, your position could be compromised." Richard made the hardest decision of his life. "Report her. Present all the evidence. I can't let her destroy more lives than she already has." That night, while Eleanor dined peacefully in the mansion, believing she had total control of the situation, a police operation was being organized to arrest her the following morning. And in the Starland district community, poor but determined families worked late into the night, planning a project that would change the future of their children, without depending on the charity of the rich or the malice of the powerful. The war was about to have an ending no one had predicted. Saturday morning began with unusual activity at the Abernathy mansion. Eleanor woke up early, systematically organizing documents and personal belongings into a discreet suitcase. Her escape was scheduled for the following afternoon, and every move was calculated not to arouse suspicion. Richard, who had spent the night awake after authorizing the criminal complaint, watched her from the hallways with a mixture of sadness and loathing. 20 years of marriage were revealed to be an elaborate farce, built on lies and exploitation. "Going on a trip?" he asked, trying to sound casual when he saw her closing the suitcase. "I'm visiting my cousin in Atlanta," she replied without looking up. "A few days away will do me good after all this mess you've created." The lie flowed naturally, like all the others she had told for years. Richard wondered how many times he had been deceived without realizing it. How many important decisions had been manipulated by the woman he thought he knew. What about the company? Who will manage the finances? "I've left everything organized. The employees know what to do." Eleanor finally faced him, and he saw in her eyes a coldness that made him shudder. "Maybe when I get back, you'll have come to your senses." 2 hours later, while Eleanor prepared breakfast pretending normalcy, 3 unmarked police cars quietly stopped in front of the mansion gate. Richard's lawyer had worked all night to obtain search warrants and an arrest warrant. Federal Agent Miller rang the doorbell promptly at 9 o'clock. Richard opened the door, already expecting the visit, while Eleanor froze in the kitchen upon hearing unfamiliar voices in the entrance. "Mr. Richard Abernathy, I'm Agent Miller. We have search and seizure warrants related to crimes against the national financial system. You can come in. My wife is in the kitchen." Eleanor appeared in the hallway with a perfectly rehearsed expression of surprise. "What's going on here?" "Mrs. Eleanor Abernathy, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent and to consult with an attorney." The farce crumbled instantly. The mask of respectability that Eleanor had worn for decades fell, revealing the panic of someone who knew she was cornered. "This is absurd. My husband is having a psychotic break, and you are being used to persecute an innocent woman. We have documents proving irregular transfers to accounts abroad in your name," the agent replied calmly. in addition to fraudulent contracts and shell corporations registered under your social security number. While the police searched the house and seized computers and documents, Eleanor shot a look of pure hatred at Richard. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life. Without me, you are nothing. Without you, I can finally discover who I really am," he replied with a tranquility that surprised even himself. Eleanor's arrest spread through Savannah like wildfire. By noon, the entire city was commenting on the downfall of the woman who considered herself untouchable due to her social position. For many, especially in the Starland district community, the news was received as a form of cosmic justice. "I knew that woman was up to no good," commented Mrs. Johnson to Beatrice when they met at the grocery store. "People with so much wickedness in their hearts always end up paying for their deeds." Beatrice, however, felt genuine concern for Richard. Despite all the problems that his involvement with her had caused, she recognized that he was as much a victim as they were. "Do you think he's okay?" she asked Susan when they met at the school. Finding out that his wife had been robbing him for years must have been terrible. "Let's visit him," Susan decided. "He helped us when he could. Now maybe he needs support." That afternoon, while lawyers and accountants worked to quantify the damages caused by Eleanor, Richard received an unexpected visit. Beatrice, Susan, and Emily appeared at the door of the mansion, carrying a casserole prepared by Mrs. Johnson. "We thought you might not have eaten properly today," Beatrice said simply. Their kindness, after everything that had happened, touched Richard deeply. "You didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Susan interrupted. "We're friends now, and friends help each other in difficult times." Emily approached timidly. "Mr. Richard, are you sad because the mean lady left?" The childish perspective of the situation made Richard smile for the first time in days. "I'm a little sad, but also relieved. Sometimes the people who live with us aren't who we think they are. Like in Snow White, the stepmother seemed good, but was evil. Exactly like in Snow White. But in the end, Snow White is happy with her real friends." Emily completed with the simple wisdom of childhood. While sharing the meal in the mansion's kitchen, ironically the first moment of true family harmony that house had witnessed in years, Susan told about the progress of the community project. "We got Mr. Smith's old house for a symbolic rent. Tomorrow we'll start cleaning and making small repairs. If you want to help, you'd be very welcome. But discreetly," Beatrice added quickly. "We don't want to create confusion for you." "After everything that's happened, I don't need to hide anymore," Richard said. "Eleanor can't threaten anyone anymore." The following Monday, an unusual scene took place on the street where Mr. Smith's old house was located. The wealthiest businessman in Savannah was on his knees on the floor, helping Beatrice clean old tiles, while Susan coordinated a group of volunteers in organizing the space. Emily ran among the adults, supervising everything with the seriousness of a small project coordinator. "Miss Susan, I think the library should be near the window, to have more light." "I completely agree," Susan replied, treating the girl's suggestion with the respect due to an important collaborator. "And the computer lab can be here in the back, which is quieter," Emily added, demonstrating impressive logical thinking for her age. Richard watched the girl with growing admiration. Free from the constant tension that had dominated his life in recent weeks, Emily blossomed visibly, demonstrating an intelligence and maturity that confirmed all the potential he had glimpsed in her. "Beatrice," he said during a water break, "can I ask a personal question?" "You may. How did you manage to raise such a special granddaughter amidst so many difficulties?" Beatrice looked at Emily, who was teaching a younger child to organize donated books. "I think she raised me, actually. After I lost my daughter, it was the love for her that gave me the strength to continue. And a child who grows up knowing that she is loved even if she is in need develops an inner strength that nothing can break." "You're right. I was lucky to be adopted by a family that gave me opportunities, but I was never sure that I was really loved. It makes a difference." "Now you have a family that really loves you," Beatrice said, gesturing to include Susan and the other people working around them. Family isn't just blood, it's mutual choice. That afternoon, when the day's work was over, the group gathered in the small patio of the house to assess progress. In just one day, the space had been transformed. Clean rooms, walls painted in cheerful colors, functionally organized donated furniture. "How soon do you think we can open?" Richard asked. "If everyone continues to help like this, we'll be ready in 2 weeks," Susan estimated. "And we're going to have an opening party," Emily suggested, "with cake and everything." "With cake and everything," Richard agreed, laughing. "I'll pay for the cake." "We'll make the cake," Beatrice corrected. "You've already helped too much." "Then everyone brings something," Susan proposed diplomatically. "It makes a real community party." As they walked home in the late afternoon, Emily held Richard's hand on one side and Beatrice's on the other. "Grandma, now we have a big family, right?" "Yes, my dear, a family that chose to love each other." That night, Richard slept alone in the empty mansion, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel lonely. He had found something that money had never been able to buy, a true family built on genuine love and shared purpose. The educational center was becoming a reality. Eleanor could no longer harm anyone, and a 6-year-old girl had taught a 52-year-old businessman the true meaning of family. But there was still a final surprise waiting for them all, a discovery about the past that would connect their lives in a way that none of them could imagine. The discovery that would change everything began unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday, when Richard was organizing the company's files for the auditors investigating Eleanor's crimes. At the back of a dusty cabinet, he found a box of old papers that had belonged to his adoptive father, Mr. Abernathy. Among yellowed certificates and commercial contracts from the 1970s, there was a sealed envelope with delicate feminine handwriting. "To be opened only after my passing, Mary Abernathy." Richard recognized the name. It was his adoptive mother, who had passed away when he was 15 years old. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and found a letter that began, "My dear son Richard, if you are reading this, it means that the time has come for you to know the whole truth about your origin and about why we chose you to be our son." The letter revealed that Mary Abernathy had not only been a successful businesswoman, but also a woman who had dedicated years of her life helping needy families in Savannah. She and Mr. Abernathy had adopted Richard after learning his story through nuns from the local orphanage. "Your birth name was John Miller," the letter said. "Your biological parents, John Miller and Mary Miller, lost their lives in a terrible accident in 1972. You were 2 years old and had an older sister, Joan Miller, who was 5 years old at the time." The name Joan struck Richard like lightning. Joan Miller, the employee who had worked for him for 3 years. Emily's mother. The woman who had abruptly left the company shortly before the accident that took her life. Richard's hands trembled so much that he almost dropped the letter. He continued reading with growing astonishment. "Joan was adopted by another family in the region, the Peterson. We tried to adopt both siblings together, but circumstances did not allow it. For years I looked for news about her, but we lost contact when the adoptive family moved inland." The realization exploded in Richard's mind with devastating force. Joan Miller was not only his former employee, she was his biological sister, and that meant that Emily, the girl he had tried to help, moved by an inexplicable connection, was his niece. "Peterson," he murmured, remembering Beatrice's full last name, Beatrice Peterson. The woman who had raised Joan was the same one who was now raising Emily. Richard ran to the car in the rain, driving at high speed to the house where the educational center was being organized. He found Beatrice cleaning windows while Susan organized donated books. "Beatrice, I need to ask you a very important question," he said, breathless from running and from emotion. "Did you know Joan Miller when she was a child?" Beatrice stopped cleaning and stared at him in surprise. "I did. I was married to Anthony Peterson at the time. Joan was raised by my mother-in-law, Mrs. Peterson. Why do you ask? Was Joan adopted? She was. She came to our family when she was 5 years old, after being orphaned in a terrible accident. Mrs. Peterson always said that she had a younger brother who was adopted by another family, but we never knew what family it was. Richard showed the letter with trembling hands. I am Joan's brother. Emily is my biological niece. The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice read the letter twice before she could speak, while Susan watched the revelation with growing astonishment. Good heavens, Beatrice whispered. Joan always said she had a lost brother. In the last years of her life, she became obsessed with looking for you. She was looking for me? She was. That's why she agreed to work at your company. When she learned that the owner was named Richard Abernathy and was a similar age to her lost brother, she thought it could be you. But why didn't she ever tell me anything? Beatrice sighed deeply. Because she was afraid. You were a wealthy, married, respected businessman. She was a poor, single mother without formal education. She was ashamed to present herself as your sister and Emily's father. Joan never wanted to say much. She said it was a relationship that didn't work out, that the man didn't even know she was pregnant. But in the last months of her life, she started saying strange things. What kind of things? That Emily was entitled to a better family, that there were important people who should know about her existence. I thought it was a delusion of the illness, but now... Susan spoke for the first time. Now I understand why Richard felt so connected to Emily from the first moment. It was family instinct. Where is Emily now? Richard asked urgently. At school. On Tuesdays she stays for tutoring until 5. Richard looked at the clock. 4:30 in the afternoon. We need to pick her up. I need to tell her the truth. Calm down, Beatrice said, holding his arm. This is too much for a 6-year-old to absorb all at once. We have to think about how to explain it. You're right, but I can't pretend it's just a coincidence anymore. She's my blood family. She's always been your family, Beatrice corrected gently. Now we just have the confirmation. When Emily arrived from school an hour later, she found the 3 adults sitting in a circle in the main room of the Future Educational Center, with serious but not sad expressions. Why does everyone look like they're having an important meeting? She asked, once again demonstrating her keen perception. Because we've discovered something very special about our family, Richard said, reaching out for her to come closer. What kind of special thing? Beatrice took the floor. Emily, do you remember the stories I used to tell you about your mother, about how she always talked about a brother she had lost when she was a child? I remember. Mommy said she would find him one day. She found him, my dear. Your Uncle Richard is your mother's lost brother. Emily processed the information with characteristic seriousness, her big eyes going from Beatrice to Richard. Uncle Richard is my real uncle. I am your uncle by blood and heart, Richard confirmed, kneeling to be at her height. Does that mean my mommy is happy now because she found her brother through me? The question deeply touched everyone present. Even at 6 years old, Emily intuitively understood that there was something bigger operating in their lives. I think your mother is very happy, Susan said softly, and very proud of you. And now are we going to live together, like a real family? The question created a moment of reflection for everyone. Beatrice had raised Emily since she was a baby and was effectively her mother. Richard was the newly discovered biological uncle. How to organize this new family dynamic? We can be a real family the way we are now, Beatrice said. You keep living with me, who is your grandma from the heart. Uncle Richard continues to be your dear uncle, and we all take care of each other. Like the family at the educational center? Exactly. A chosen family that is now also blood family. Emily hugged Richard tightly. Uncle, now that we're a real family, can you teach me about the company? I want to learn how to help people like you did with me. The innocence of the question made Richard laugh through tears. I can. But first, You need to finish growing up and study hard. Am I going to study at our educational center? You'll be the first official student, Susan promised. That night, for the first time in his life, Richard experienced what it was like to have a true and complete family. Not just people who lived in the same house, but people united by genuine love, shared purpose, and now also by blood ties that had been miraculously reconnected. The discovery about his kinship with Emily not only changed his relationship with her, but gave an even deeper meaning to the Educational Center project. He wasn't just helping needy children, he was honoring the memory of his sister Joan and building a family legacy of love and opportunities. But there was still one last revelation waiting for them, one that would complete the circle in a way that none of them could have imagined. The last revelation came 3 days later through an unexpected visit that no one had anticipated. Richard was supervising the installation of shelves in the Educational Center's library when an elderly woman appeared at the door, leaning on a cane and carrying a faded cloth bag. "Excuse me," she said in a weak but determined voice. "I'm looking for Richard Abernathy." "That's me. How can I help you?" The woman studied him carefully, her moist eyes running over every feature of his face. "My name is Mrs. Peterson. I am Joan Miller's adoptive grandmother." The name echoed in the room like thunder. Beatrice, who was organizing books nearby, turned around immediately. "Mrs. Peterson, hadn't we heard you passed?" "Everyone thought so. I was in a nursing home in Macon for 2 years, without contact with any family. I was only able to leave last week when my niece from Atlanta came to get me." Richard respectfully approached the woman who had raised his sister. "Mrs. Peterson, I recently discovered that Joan was my biological sister." "I know, son. That's why I'm here." She opened the bag and took out a yellowed envelope. "Joan left me this before she passed. She said that if a man named Richard Abernathy ever appeared looking for her, I should deliver this." With trembling hands, Richard opened the envelope and found a letter in Joan's careful handwriting. "My dear brother Richard, if you are reading this, it means that we have met even after I have passed away. I always knew that you were the Richard Abernathy from the textile company. From the first day I worked for you, I recognized your eyes, the same almond-shaped eyes we had as children." Richard needed to stop reading for a moment, moved by the revelation that Joan had always known who he was. "I didn't have the courage to introduce myself as your sister because I was ashamed of the life I led. You became an important, respected, rich man. I was just a poor woman, a single mother without education. I thought I would embarrass you." "How could she think that?" Richard murmured, tears running down his face. The letter continued. "But I want you to know that working for you were the best years of my adult life. Every day, I could see my little brother grown up and successful. It gave me a joy that you can't imagine." Beatrice approached, also crying. "Keep reading, son. About Emily's father, I need to tell the truth. She is the daughter of Carlos Bennett, who also worked at your company. He never knew about the pregnancy because I never told him. When I found out I was pregnant, he had already left for another state." The revelation about Emily's paternity created a new dimension to the story. Carlos had been an excellent employee whom Richard respected very much. "I didn't tell Carlos because he was young, had plans to grow professionally, and I didn't want to hinder his dreams. But Emily has the right to know her father, just as you have the right to know your niece." The letter continued with even more surprising revelations. "Richard, there is something about our family that neither you nor I knew. Mrs. Peterson discovered through conversations with nuns from the orphanage that our biological mother, Mary Miller, had a younger sister who was also orphaned at the same time. Her name was Beatrice Miller." Richard stopped reading, looking at Beatrice with growing astonishment. "Miller was your maiden name?" "It was," Beatrice confirmed, pale as paper. "My parents were also lost in an accident when I was a child. I was raised by nuns in an orphanage. Mrs. Peterson confirmed with a nod. The nuns told me the whole story when Joan started investigating the family's origins. Beatrice is the sister of your mother. That makes her the blood aunt of Joan and Richard. The final revelation hit everyone like an emotional avalanche. Beatrice was not only Emily's adoptive grandmother, she was her biological great-aunt. The family had reconnected in an even more complex and miraculous way than any of them could have imagined. "This means," said Susan, trying to process all the connections, "that all of you are blood relatives?" "We are," confirmed Mrs. Peterson. "Joan discovered all of this shortly before falling ill. That's why she was so desperate to find Richard. She wanted to reunite the family before she passed." Richard finished reading the letter, which concluded, "My dear brother, I ask you to take care of Emily and Beatrice. They are the most precious people I leave in this world. Beatrice raised you and me with the same love that she is raising my daughter. She is the heart of our family, and Emily is the future of our family. Protect them, love them, and know that wherever I am, I will be happy seeing you together again." At that moment, Emily arrived from school and found the adults crying and hugging in the main room of the educational center. Instead of being frightened, she approached with the intuitive wisdom she always demonstrated. "Grandma Beatrice, why is everyone crying?" she asked, hugging Beatrice around the waist. "Because we discovered that our family is even bigger than we thought, my dear," Beatrice explained through tears. "Your great-grandmother, Mrs. Peterson, came to visit us and brought news from your mother." "Good news? Very good. Your mother wanted all of us to stay together, taking care of each other." Emily looked around the group, Richard, Beatrice, Susan, Mrs. Peterson, and her eyes sparkled with understanding. "So now we're a giant family." "We're a giant family," Richard confirmed, picking her up in his arms, "and the educational center is our family home." "It can be," Susan said. "If you want, we can make this a place where our family meets and where other families can also find help." Mrs. Peterson, who had remained silent watching the interaction, finally spoke. "Joan would be very proud to see how you have become a real family. She always said that family isn't just blood, it's love and mutual care." That afternoon, the group decided to hold an informal ceremony to mark the family reunion and the proximity of the educational center's opening. Everyone brought a memento of Joan. Richard brought a photo of her from the time she worked at the company. Beatrice brought a drawing she had made of Emily as a baby. Mrs. Peterson brought a ring that belonged to their biological mother. "This ring," explained Mrs. Peterson, "belonged to your grandmother Mary Miller. Joan asked me to give it to Emily when she grew up, as a symbol of the continuity of the family." Emily held the small and simple ring with reverence. "Can I wear it now?" "You can, but only on special occasions," Beatrice said. "To remember that you carry the love of a whole family that fought to stay together." As the sun set over Savannah, the reunited family worked together on the final preparations for the educational center's opening. Richard installed the last shelf, Beatrice organized the cleaning supplies, Susan catalogued the donated books, and Emily wrote in neat letters a sign that read, "Joan Miller Educational Center, where families meet." "Do you like the name?" she asked proudly. "It's perfect," Richard said, touched. "Your mother would be honored." That night, for the first time in decades, Richard did not feel alone in the world. He had discovered that he had never been alone. His family had been around him all the time, just waiting for the right moment to recognize each other. The opening was scheduled for the next day, and the entire Starland District community was invited to learn about the project that was born of pain but blossomed in love. But the real opening had already happened. The opening of a family that fate had separated in childhood and life had reconnected through the unconditional love for a special child named Emily. 6 months after the opening of the Joan Miller Educational Center, A golden April morning brought another surprise that would definitely complete the family circle. Carlos Bennett was back in Savannah after receiving a letter from Richard explaining the whole situation and inviting him to meet the daughter he didn't know existed. The meeting was carefully planned at the educational center, with Emily playing in the yard, unaware that she was about to meet her biological father. At 7 years old now, she had flourished in an extraordinary way. She was the most diligent student at the center, helped the younger children with reading, and had become the project's little ambassador in the community. "He's here," announced Susan discreetly, watching a tall, dark-haired man stop in front of the gate with obvious nervousness. Carlos Bennett, at 35, had become a respected engineer in Atlanta, but nothing in his professional experience had prepared him for that moment. When Richard had told him over the phone that Joan had given him a daughter, he spent weeks processing the information before gathering the courage to make the trip. "She doesn't know you're her father," Richard explained when Carlos entered the main room. "We decided that you should meet her first, create a natural bond before revealing the truth. How do I explain my presence here? Say you're a friend of the family, that you worked with me and knew her mother. Let the relationship develop naturally." Carlos watched through the window the girl who was playing in the yard, teaching a group of younger children to form words with movable letters. There was something familiar in her gestures, a gentle determination that vaguely reminded him of himself in childhood. "She looks like you," said Beatrice, who had approached silently. "She has your eyes and your way of explaining things patiently. What if she doesn't like me? What if I don't know how to be a father?" "No one is born knowing," replied Beatrice, with the wisdom of someone who had raised 2 generations. "But love is learned in practice, day after day." When Emily was called to meet the visitor, she entered the room with the natural curiosity of children, but without shyness. Months of living with volunteers at the center had developed in her a confident sociability. "Hi, are you Uncle Carlos, who worked with my Uncle Richard?" "I am," Carlos replied, kneeling to be at her height. "I've heard a lot about you." "Good things?" "Only wonderful things. They said you're very smart and help the other children learn." Emily smiled, clearly pleased with the compliment. "Do you want to see our center? It's very pretty." During the next hour, Emily led Carlos on a complete tour of the educational center, proudly explaining each space, introducing other children, showing her favorite drawings pasted on the walls. Her passion for the project and her natural ability to teach deeply impressed Carlos. "Emily, can I ask you a question?" he said when they stopped in the library. "You can. Would you like to have a daddy?" The question caught the girl off guard. She was thoughtful for a moment before responding with her characteristic honesty. "Sometimes I think about it, but I already have a very big family. I have Grandma Beatrice, Uncle Richard, Miss Susan, Great-Grandma Mrs. Peterson, and now you can be my friend too?" "I can. And what if I told you that maybe I could be more than your friend?" Emily studied him with her intelligent eyes. "Did you really know my mom?" "I did. We worked together and I liked her very much." "Then you can be my daddy from the heart," she decided with the simplicity typical of childhood. "Like Uncle Richard is my uncle from the heart, and Grandma Beatrice is my grandma from the heart." Emily's natural acceptance touched Carlos deeply. There was no need for complicated explanations about biology or past circumstances. For her, family was simply people who chose to love each other. 3 months later, Carlos had permanently moved to Savannah, opening an engineering office in the city and visiting Emily daily. The revelation about biological fatherhood happened naturally when she herself began to notice physical similarities between them. "Daddy Carlos," she said one afternoon, "people say I have your eyes. Does that mean you're my real daddy?" "It means I'm your daddy by blood and by heart," he confirmed, "but you already had a perfect family before I arrived. Now I have an even more perfect family." she responded logically. The Joan Miller Educational Center had become a success beyond all expectations. It served 40 children from the community, offered vocational courses for teenagers, and had become a model for other similar projects in the region. Richard had used part of the resources recovered from Eleanor's scheme to expand the project, always maintaining the community character that was its essence. Eleanor had been sentenced to 8 years in prison and forced to return all the embezzled amounts. Interestingly, her downfall had freed Richard not only financially but emotionally, allowing him to discover who he really was when he wasn't under the control of someone who secretly despised him. On a Sunday afternoon, a year after the center's opening, the whole family was gathered in the yard to celebrate Emily's 8th birthday. The improvised table was covered with dishes brought by everyone. Beatrice had made her granddaughter's favorite chocolate cake. Susan had prepared sandwiches for all the children present. Carlos had brought soft drinks. Richard had organized games. And Mrs. Peterson, despite being 89 years old, had insisted on making her famous coconut kisses, macaroons. "Make a wish, my dear," said Beatrice when it was time to blow out the candles. Emily closed her eyes with concentration, took a few seconds, and blew out the 8 candles at once. When she opened her eyes, everyone asked what wish she had made. "I wished that our family would always stay together, and that other children could also have families like ours," she responded seriously. "Your wish is already coming true," said Susan, pointing to the children who were playing around them. Many coming from dysfunctional homes had found a second home at the educational center, with positive parental figures in the adult volunteers. Richard observed the scene with deep gratitude. He had spent 50 years of his life believing that family was just a social obligation, a convenient arrangement to divide financial responsibilities. Eleanor had reinforced that cynical view during 2 decades of empty marriage. Now, surrounded by people who genuinely loved him and for whom he felt unconditional love, he understood that he had wasted most of his adult life. But he also understood that it is never too late to start over, to discover real purpose, to build something that truly matters. "Uncle Richard," said Emily, interrupting his thoughts, "are you happy?" "Happier than I ever imagined possible," he answered honestly. "So, was all that sadness at the beginning worth it?" The question demonstrated the precocious wisdom of a child who had gone through real suffering and learned that difficulties can lead to important discoveries. "It was, my dear niece, because it was the sadness that brought me to you. And we brought you to joy," she completed, hugging him tightly. As the sun set over Savannah, painting the sky gold and pink, the reunited family cleaned up the remains of the party. Everyone had a function. Emily collected the toys, Carlos stacked the chairs, Beatrice put away the dishes, Richard swept the yard. Susan organized the educational materials that the children had used during the afternoon. It was a scene of domestic harmony that might seem common to external observers, but that represented a miracle of family reconnection for all involved. A family that had been separated by extreme poverty in childhood, dispersed by decades of life, and finally reunited through the love for a special child who carried within her the best of each of them. The Joan Miller Educational Center would continue to function, grow, helping new generations of children. Emily would grow up loved and protected, developing all her intellectual and emotional potential. Beatrice would have her last years illuminated by the certainty that she had fulfilled her mission to keep the family united. Carlos would discover the joys of responsible fatherhood. Richard would find real purpose in his wealth, using it to create opportunities instead of just accumulating assets. And somewhere, in the mystery that surrounds the lives that have already departed, Joan watched her family finally reunited, knowing that her love and her determination had planted seeds that blossomed into something greater than she could have dreamed. The girl who once shared crumbs with a stray golden retriever mix had become the gravitational center of a rebuilt family and the living symbol that true love always finds a way to manifest itself, even in the most improbable circumstances.